27 years after a truck driver vanished, drought let divers lift a 90s tractor cab from a quiet reservoir. Inside, a palm-sized cassette, still intact. On it, Ray Mercer's last CB call. Blue sedan still on me. Passing mile 215 spur. That spur isn't on any map. Company logs say he never left his route. The cab's VIN tag says otherwise. Re-riveted. Too clean. Tonight, we line up the tape, the maps, and the waterline. If this voice is real, the paperwork isn't. Stay with me to the end. February 12, 1997, 4:12 a.m. Midwest, U.S. Highway. Rain stitched the dark in thin silver lines. Sodium lights hummed over an empty way station, the kind that glowed even when the sign said closed. Ray Mercer drove past at 55, steady hands on the wheel, eyes on the mirrors, more than the lane ahead. He was a veteran driver, 20 years on the road, the kind who kept thermos coffee and a neat logbook. Tonight, his shoulders were tight. He pressed the CB mic. Southbound, this is Mercer. Blue sedan still hugging my bumper. Been there since the county line. Static crackled. Then the wind shoved across the cab. A man's voice answered, grainy and distant. Copy, Mercer. You sure it's on you? Not passing, Ray said. Not dropping back. Just there. He checked the mirror again. Two pale headlights hung at the edge of the spray. Too close to be casual, too far to be friendly. On the right, the highway shoulder was a thin river. On the left, black fields swallowed the light beyond the guardrail. He thumbed the mic. Dispatch, you on? I'm reading mile 215 spur. Then on tonight's sheet? Silence. The wipers beat. Rain hammered the roof. He looked up at the green sign sliding past his passenger window, white letters that shouldn't have existed on his route. Mile 215 spur service exit 1Me. He hadn't seen that sign before. Not on this stretch. Not on any run. Dispatch. He tried again. Getting a little busy back here. The radio popped and thinned. A second voice bled in, calm and clipped, like office etiquette run through a tunnel. Mercer, maintain course. Copy, he said, but his jaw tightened. He reached for the paper log in the clip by his knee and ran a thumb under the top sheet. It showed the same route he'd run all month. No spur, no service exit, no deviation. The blue sedan edged closer, lights trembling in the spray. Ray held steady. Years had taught him not to brake, not to taunt. Let the stranger make the mistake. Wind shoved again. The truck shouldered it like a tired ox. Ahead, the road rose into a shallow curve, a narrow bridge, then a low run of trees. He knew the next real exit was 15 miles. He did not know this one. Any southbound copy on a ghost exit near 215? He tried the open channel. Sign says spur. Never seen it. A different driver came back, amused, half awake. You seeing things, old-timer? Ain't no spur out here. Ray would have laughed on another night. Tonight he didn't. He eased off 2 miles per hour and tapped the fog lights. The sedan's headlights dipped, then steadied. Still there. He pressed the mic once more, softer, a voice he used only when he wanted someone to truly listen. If this is a bad turn, I'm rolling past it. Mark my time, 0413. If I don't clear the spur, I'm turning back at the river bridge. Static braided the wind. The calm, clipped voice returned, thinner now, like it was coming through a vent. Maintain course, Mercer. He let go of the mic. Rain deepened. The green sign loomed again, this time with a smaller arrow and a promise of services that no one in the dark could see. He scanned the shoulder. No cones. No work lights. No reason for a new exit. The sedan drifted left, then tucked back behind his trailer. Close enough now that he could feel the pressure change. He breathed through his nose, steady, hands firm, no showy moves. "All right," he said to the empty cab. "We're not dancing tonight." He passed the ramp. The spur peeled away into black water and reeds, a pale ribbon with no streetlights, no traffic, no proof it ever mattered. His mirrors filled with spray. The sedan hung back a heartbeat, then vanished into the mist like someone had pinched out its lights. Ray frowned and checked his mirrors twice. Nothing. Only rain. Only the faint ghost of his own trailer lights smeared across wet pavement. He keyed the mic, relief tucked under his breath. "Think we're clear." "Mark it. Oh, 4:15. Spur behind me." The wind answered. Then a long hiss. Then a sound like a sleeve brushing the mic. "Mercer?" The calm voice tried again, paper thin. "Confirm position." He looked for a landmark. The way station glow, far behind now, had become a soft bruise on the horizon. The fields to either side were darker than the sky. The bridge rose ahead like a black belt. "Passing the river," he said, holding lane. The tape inside his little CB recorder clicked as it rolled. He kept it for receipts and odd nights like this, for when memory wasn't enough. "Copy," the calm voice said. "Maintain." The word died. Static lifted. The highway hummed. Rain softened to a fine veil. Ray eased his shoulders down and took one long breath. He did not arrive at dawn. By 8 a.m., the dispatcher stamped his log. Normal route. The line too neat, the ink too quick. The day clerk filed it without a note. The way station stayed closed. The rain dried out of the ditches like nothing had ever happened there at all. Years later, someone would pause the story on this frame. A wet lane, empty under a gray sky, wipers beating in no one's cab. A mile marker that didn't exist. A rig that never came home. And a voice caught on tape, saying he'd pass the spur and keep the river on his left. June 2024, County Reservoir. The water had been falling for months. Shorelines stepped back like old hems. Stumps rose where trees once stood. Fence posts, long drowned, poked through the surface like tired fingers. Locals said you could smell the lake's age now, mud, iron, weeds that had not seen sun in 27 years. A volunteer dive team trailered in at dawn. No sirens, no crowds, just a handful of trucks and a flat gray sky. They unloaded slowly, dry suits, reels, lift bags, a small side scan unit that looked too simple to know what it knew. A fisherman at the ramp pointed with his chin toward the far cove. "Been catching on something out there," he said. "More than logs." The divers motored out. The boat's wake drew pale lines on the flat water. At mid-cove, the sonar threw a hard shape on the tablet, angles, not branches. One diver tapped the screen twice. Nobody cheered. They marked it with a little orange float and dropped anchor up current. The first descent was quiet work. The lake took them into the shoulders, then the heads. Then the bubbles were the only proof they were there. Silt breathed up around their lights in slow brown clouds. The shape grew out of that murk, roof first, glass black, a hard corner, a mirror arm bent down like a hooked elbow. Not a car. Bigger. A cab nose down in the soft bed, buried to the bumper. They moved with gloved patience, brushing mud from edges, tracing lines with their pumps. One hand found a badge plate. Another found a seam where the badge didn't sit quite right. The diver's light paused there. He pressed his thumb to it and felt the faint catch where paint had been scored and reset. He thumbed his mic inside the mask. Cab, tractor, VIN plates off. Something's wrong with the rivets. Above, the boat rocked. A gull called. Onshore, a deputy lifted yellow tape from a duffel and looped it between two willow trunks. No one crossed it. There was no crowd to hold back. Only the fisherman, who took off his cap and held it in both hands without knowing why. They rigged the lift bags with care. No rush. Air bloomed slowly into the orange cuffs until the cab's weight began to argue with the mud. Silt folded, then let go in a heavy sigh. The nose rose inches, then a foot, dripping lake in sheets. Water peeled off the windshield. A sun-faded strip of dash came into view. The cab hung there, suspended, old and stubborn, as if surprised to feel air again. At the ramp, the sheriff said little. He logged times. He called the state. He wrote the word recovery, not rescue, because words mattered. He placed cones where the trailer would back down. He looked at the low water line on the rocks and at the thin bones of the trees and thought about years. When the lift bags did their last work and the cab kissed the surface, a few people on the bank stepped back out of habit. The mud stink reached them first, metal, algae, sun-baked time. A diver swept the windshield with the flat of a hand and cleared a circle big enough to stare into. It was dark inside, just a wheel, a torn map pocket, no faces. Nothing to hurt a viewer. The diver nodded once to nobody. They eased the cab onto bunks padded with old fire hose. The trailer winch moaned, steady as a clock. The water fell away in sheets. A rectangle on the dash caught the light. A plate. The diver traced it with a knuckle and then held up 2 fingers to the sheriff. Re-riveted, he said when he'd pulled his mask down around his neck. Not factory. Someone took it off and put it back. The heads don't match. The sheriff wrote that too. He didn't say what it meant. He didn't have to. Not yet. They wrapped the cab in a blue tarp and left one corner free for the plate. A camera clicked 3 times. No flashes. No angles for television. The tape fluttered in a dry breeze that smelled like clay and old secrets. A volunteer shut off the boat motor, and the cove went still enough to hear the drip from the trailer rails. No one spoke the driver's name on the bank. Not yet. The water had given only the first piece back, and the lake kept its rules. You took what it offered. You labeled what you saw. You waited for what rose next. They rolled the tarp back like a curtain and cracked the passenger door first. Lake water sighed out, brown and patient, carrying silt, seed husks, and a paper clip that spun once before dropping to the ramp. A tech slid in on his elbows, chest on the sill, light in his teeth. The air inside the cab smelled like wet rubber and old coffee. Most things had turned to suggestion, maps to pulp, receipts to soft bricks. But on the floor, wedged beneath the shifter where a heel would rest, sat a little gray box with a cracked hinge. It looked like something a driver would keep nails in. The tech tipped it toward his palm. Water bled out. Inside, cushioned by a strip of towel torn from a motel handcloth, lay a palm-sized microcassette recorder and 1 cloudy tape in a zip bag that had actually sealed. He didn't press any buttons. He just lifted his chin to the sheriff. Recorder. Tapes bagged. They passed it down the human chain, gloved hands to gloved hands, into a clean evidence box with silica packs waiting like little lifeboats. A volunteer wrote 2 lines on a card and slid it under the lid. No ceremony. No comment about the weight of a voice that might still be there. On the bench seat, a weathered dispatch envelope had glued itself to the vinyl. The corner came up first, then the body, leaving a ghost rectangle on the cushion. The envelope wore the company letterhead in faded blue and a red rubber stamp, Night Run. Inside, the contents had fused into a damp sheaf, thin as tree bark. The tech coaxed it open with a paint spatula and patience. A route strip emerged in pieces. Legible enough to read 3 words typed in block letters. Redline storage, baby 12. The sheriff made a small mark in his notebook. The log from 1997 had shown a grocery distribution center, neat as a calendar entry. Storage wasn't groceries. B12 wasn't a duck the clerk would have stamped by habit. He didn't say any of that out loud. He just wrote the time. In the cup holder, a pay stub had survived inside a folded plastic sleeve from a truck stop rewards card. The ink was stiff but readable. The week number fit. The miles didn't. There was a fuel advance keyed to a route code that didn't appear on the normal log the company sent back to the family that spring. Someone had paid him for a loop that the paperwork would later pretend he never drove. The glove box stuck on the first tug and surrendered on the second. A slide of pens, a cracked pair of readers, a roll of quarters dark with tarnish, and a neat stack of Polaroids bound with a rubber band that snapped as soon as it met air. The top photo showed a way station at night, bar arm down, the glass box lit from within, rain turning the asphalt into a mirror. In the foreground, the nose of a familiar cab, wipers caught mid-swipe. Someone had scribbled 2 words along the white border in pencil, night audit. A deputy leaned closer. That the one up on 39? Was, the sheriff said. He kept his voice flat. The state had closed that site the previous November, months before Ray vanished. The picture didn't know that yet. They laid the items in a shallow tray lined with freezer paper, giving everything room to breathe. A tiny clump of lakeweed clung to the dispatch envelope like a bookmark. The recorder sat at the far edge, still as a sealed letter. Fume hood first, the text said, almost to himself. Then a warm box. We don't rush the tape. He took one last look around the cab. The box on the floor had left a clean square in the grit. The radio faceplate was gone, probably scavenged before the lake took it. The dash clock was frozen at nonsense. On the passenger kick panel, a faint ring where a magnet had once held a road map curled like a watermark. They closed the door to slow the drying and tape the seams. The sheriff stood back, boots in wet gravel, pen poised. He glanced at the tray, the envelope, the stub, the Polaroid, the little machine that might still hold a man's last ordinary words, and then at the quiet faces on shore who would not ask questions yet. Vag and tag, he said. The lake lapped at the trailer rails like a metronome. The wind slid across the reservoir and kept going. Somewhere beyond the low trees, an old highway curved past a sign that wasn't supposed to be there, and a way station slept with its lights off, waiting for someone to remember it had ever been awake. Leah Mercer had kept the case alive the way people keep houseplants in winter, turning them toward any light she could find. 3 milk crates under her kitchen window held 27 years of paper, photocopied logs, no records found to letters, printouts of unanswered emails with the same gray banner, delivery status notification failure. She'd labeled the lids in block marker, dispatch, /state, tips. On the wall, a folded highway map spidered with red thread traced the last route her father should have taken and the detours people swore he didn't. She wasn't loud online. No petitions, no podcasts. Just periodic messages sent to old company addresses that bounced back, and a calendar reminder set to the date he missed her 12th birthday. Every year she called the number in his wallet. The company switched phone trees 3 times. She learned all of them anyway. When the sheriff called about the reservoir, Leah sat very still. He said there had been a recovery. He said they were handling it quietly. He didn't say her father's name until the end of the call, as if putting it there would make the sentence stand without falling. At the sheriff's office, the evidence lay under a clear lid, each item breathing in its own small rectangle of air. A weather dispatch envelope, a brittle pay stub, a Polaroid labeled night audit, and a palm-sized microcassette recorder still sleeping in its bag. No one made speeches. The detective slid a pair of nitrile gloves across the table and gave her time. Leah bent over the envelope first. The company letterhead wore a sun-faded blue, and the corner showed a red night run stamp half smeared by water. Along the bottom edge, where a dispatcher would scrawl last-minute notes, pencil had survived, light, practiced, the kind of hand that never lifted long enough to make a flourish. Two short lines. Temporary route, okay. Storage, baby 12. The letters were neat, the numbers simpler. The sevens had little crossbars. The ones stood like fence posts. Leah's mouth tightened. That's Connie, she said, not looking up. The way she makes her sevens. She used to draw tiny dashes through them. Said it kept the drivers from misreading in rain. The detective watched her face. Connie, night dispatcher. Connie Hale, Leah said. She was the one who always picked up after 10. She put a little tick on the tail of her Y's. Leah traced the pencil loop over Bay without touching it. That's her hand. Below the note sat a darker pressure mark, two initials pressed hard enough to dent the paper after the pencil line had dried. It wasn't a flourish. It was a stamp made by intent. RF. Leah blinked. She heard the shift before she named it. But Connie didn't sign RF. Who did? The detective asked. She let out a thin breath. There were two men upstairs who signed their approvals on the night runs. The regional manager and a risk consultant who came in after hours when a claim got messy. He wasn't dispatch. She looked back at the dented initials as if they might answer her. We never spoke. Just heard about him. The detective wrote the letters in his notebook, RF, and drew a small box around them. The pay stub in the next tray told a different truth than the company had mailed in 1997. The miles paid were higher. The route code belonged to a loop that didn't appear on the normal route copy the family kept in a frame. Leah held the numbers in her eye a few seconds longer than she needed, memorizing what the lake had given back. In the Polaroid, rain turned asphalt to a mirror. The way station sat lit and lonely, its bar arm down, a glass box bright as an aquarium. Night audit ran along the white border in a hand that wasn't Connie's, block letters, quick and square. Leah remembered calling that station after it was shuttered and reaching only a recorded line that said to check the website for hours. There had never been a website. She looked last at the recorder, the little machine inside its bag. She didn't ask to play it. Not yet. She pictured her father's thumb on the red button, the way he'd use a knee to steady the wheel when he reached for anything at all. The detective didn't push. He let the quiet stand. Connie would have called me if she'd changed his route, Leah said softly. She always did. She put notes in the margins for birthdays. She swallowed. But that signature, those initials, aren't hers. The detective closed the lid. We'll find out whose they are. Leah nodded once. She had learned to live between lines that told different stories, the one on paper and the one that kept her up at night. Now the paper itself had started to disagree. It wasn't victory. It was a seam. And seams, she'd learned, were where you could start pulling. They didn't play the tape on a desk machine. They treated it like a wet bird. In the lab, a tech opened the microcassette bag under a fume hood. Silica packs had done their quiet work. He eased the door of a warming cabinet, set the cassette inside at low heat, and waited. No hair dryers. No shortcuts. Moisture had to leave the tape, not boil it. When it was ready, he threaded it through a serviced recorder, fresh belts, clean heads, pressure pad replaced. He checked azimuth with a tone cassette, nudged the head angle a hair until the meter rose. He hit play for a second, stopped, rewound, then routed the output into a digital interface. A screen bloomed with a spectrogram, stripes of sound like weather on a radar map. Roll capture, he said. The first thing they heard was road. Wideband hiss that wasn't hiss at all, tires combing wet asphalt, wind threading through mirrors. Far back, a dash rattle, then a thumb on plastic, and a voice that belonged in a cab, not a room. "Southbound, this is Mercer," the man said. Calm, tired. Blue sedan still hugging my bumper. The tech marked the line with a flag. Leah had asked to be there, but not to sit close. She stood behind glass with the detective, arms folded, eyes fixed on the speaker like it might change if she blinked. On the screen, the voice drew bright oranges and yellows. A second thumb sound. The cab got louder for a breath, the mic closer to Ray's mouth. "Passing a sign reads mile 215 spur," he said. "Not on my sheet." The tech glanced at the detective. He kept rolling. Static braided with wind. The lane sang under weight. Rain ticked the cab roof like a jar lid. Ray breathed once, slow, the way people do when they're trying not to change how they sound. "Dispatch," he tried. "You won?" Nothing answered for a long half-mile. Then, very softly, another voice bled in. Not from the same room as Ray. Not from the open channel chatter of truckers. It was thin, clipped, almost office radio in its manners. "Mercer, maintain course," it said. No handle. No call sign. No 10 code. Just instruction, like a memo read aloud. The tech leaned closer to the meters. "That's not CB lingo," he said, mostly to himself. Ray didn't challenge it. He pressed the button again. "Copy," he said, but his breath roughed the mic foam. Blue sedan still on me. The road swelled and fell. The tape carried little moments a camera never would. A thermos cap set down. The sleeve of a coat brushing nylon. The faint ping of a rain bead rolling into a vent. Then the billboard bright sign in his voice again. "If I don't clear the spur, I'm turning back at the river." The tech dropped another flag. He wound the noise down with gentle filters, low cut to tame the wind, a de-hiss that didn't chew the S's. The words came forward like a figure in fog. The second voice returned, thinner, as if piped through ductwork. "Confirm position. Ray, holding lane. Spur to my right. No lights." Office voice. "Maintain course." The detective wrote the phrase "maintain course" in his notebook and boxed it twice. The lab guy soloed the quiet spots, hunting clues. Under Ray's words, the spectrogram showed a steady hum at 60 hertz and a tiny click cadence Leah couldn't hear until he boosted it. "What's that?" she asked through the intercom. "Could be relays," he said. "Could be fluorescent ballasts. Could be nothing." "From his cab?" the detective asked. The tech shook his head. "Not that pattern. Sounds roomy, like somewhere with panels." They let the tape run. It wasn't long. Micro cassettes never are when they're real. No shouted chase. No crash. Just a man calling mile markers that did not match paper, a car that stayed where it shouldn't, and a second voice that never said who it was. Near the end, Ray's tone changed by a degree only families hear. Relief threaded in, thin as thread. "Think we're clear. Mark it. Oh, 4:15. Spur behind me." His sleeve brushed the mic again. Tires sang. Rain softened from hammer to veil. Then, the office voice one last time, almost like checking a box. "Mercer, confirm position." A half beat. Ray, passing the river, holding lane. The tape clicked. Silence took the meters to black. The tech didn't exhale until the counter hit leader tape. He stopped capture and saved 3 copies to 3 drives with 3 labels because that's how you keep ghosts honest. He logged the length. He logged the flags. He set the cassette back in its case like a ring. Leah looked at the detective. "There's no mile 215 spur on the current maps," she said, steady. "There used to be," he answered, not as a guess. "Sometimes highways forget faster than families." He tapped maintain course on his page and drew a line to dispatch, then to RF. Different ink. Same paper. Outside the glass, the lab lights hum their own thin, even note. In the recorder's silence, you could almost hear the empty lane, rain knitting the dark, and a sign that told a driver to turn where no map ever said he should. County Records Annex. 2 weeks later, the annex smelled like dust and ink. Ceiling fans turned slow. A clerk rolled out a gray cart, stacked with boxes that looked like they'd never been opened, and set them on a table under a bank of humming lights. Bills of lading, late 96 through 98, she said. Some on microfilm. Some hard copy. We keep what people forgot to ask for. Leah slipped on thin cotton gloves. The detective didn't. He used a pencil and a small ruler like a man measuring currents. They started with microfilm. The clerk threaded the reel, the machine whirred, and a river of dot matrix pages slid by in high contrast black. The detective tapped the glass. Stop. Back one. There it was, bill of lading across the top, company header in a pixelated blue band, a date that matched the week Ray disappeared. The consignee field read, Grove Point Grocery DC, Dock 3, Commodity, Dry Goods, weight in pallets typed neat. In the lower right corner, someone had initialed with a small, tidy loop. Connie, Leah said, almost a whisper. Her initials. That's the grocery DC the company showed us back then. The clerk printed a copy. The paper came out warm, the letters too crisp to be 27 years old. The detective boxed Grove Point, Dock 3 on his pad, and drew an arrow to Ch. They moved a hard copy, a banker's box with a collapsing lid and a label half peeled away. Inside, carbon sets slept in thin manila jackets. The detective slid one out and breathed. Original, pink shipper, yellow carrier, white company. The top page had bled through the others the way pressure marks do, making ghosts of numbers on every layer. Consignee, red line storage, Bay B12. The type matched the company's will writer, blocky, slightly crowded fives. Below the line, someone had written a short note in pencil. Temperate okay. Leah didn't need a magnifier. Connie's hand, she said. The sevens have ticks. But the signature block told another story. Below the pencil note, pressed hard enough to dent the page even on the yellow copy, were initials that didn't belong to knights at the dispatch desk. RF. The detective set the pink, yellow, and white sheets side by side. He lined up the top edges. The staple holes didn't match. On the grocery DC set, the holes sat high and tight. On the storage set, lower, angled, as if someone had rebuilt the packet after the fact. The paper grain ran the same way, company stock, but Tiny Tells didn't lie. 2 versions, he said quietly. Same date. Same driver. Different destinations. Leah held the storage set up to the light. In the margin, a faint press through from another form murmured across the white page, a signature block from a risk report penned against it years ago. It had left the ghost of a title, consultant approval. RF, she said, eyes on the dent. Not Connie. The clerk rolled out a second card. We found some email printouts in a file called Night Ops, she said, apologetic. Old software. Headers are funky. Looks like CC, Mail or Lotus. Don't quote me. The detective smiled for the first time all day. He pulled the brittle sheets into a tidy stack. The headers wore dates in 1997 format, time stamps with seconds, and subject lines that sounded like someone trying to be bland on purpose. Subject: Temp route correction. From Region Almer to Night Dispatch. Risk and consult. Time: 22:41. Body: Okay to use temp spur if detour sign remains. Ensure logs reflect normal DC. Call me. Another. Subject: Night audit coordination From Risk Consult. 2. Region Olmger. Time 2308. Body. Confirm way station access for contractor's audit. No driver identifiers in memo chain. Leah read them twice, the way you read when you hope you're wrong. The detective checked the footer, printed 13th February 1997 012, and then the tiny dot matrix header burned into the top margin by an office printer that belonged to a different decade. The ink had faded to a tea color, real age, real paper. He laid the two balls beneath the emails and drew a simple map with his pencil. Grocery DC on one line, red line storage B12 on another, a third line to way station, night audit. The lines met where the calendar said they shouldn't. Why would a grocery run need a storage bay? Leah asked. Her voice didn't wobble. She sounded like someone adding columns. Only if the DC wasn't the real end, the detective said, or if they wanted the paper to say it was. He flipped the grocery ball and held it at an angle. Pressure marks from a rubber stamp appeared when the light hit right, route verified, but there was no ink. Someone had pressed the stamp without loading it. The gesture without the color. Leah closed her hand over the edge of the table, steadying herself without making a scene. They told us the logs were normal, she said. They mailed us copies with the grocery. We put it in a frame. The detective nodded toward the storage set. This packet never got mailed. Because it didn't exist, Leah said, then corrected herself. Because it wasn't supposed to. The clerk came back with one last folder, fax covers, curling at the corners, all bearing the thin black banner every machine left back then. From Redline Storage. 2. Company Night Ops. Date 12th February 1997. 3. Baby 12 Access. Confirming door code active after 2300. Audit crew will arrive separate from driver. Do not hold at gate. The room went very quiet. Ceiling fans whispered. Somewhere down the hall, a stapler clicked, small and exact. Paper didn't accuse. It suggested. It lined its edges up with other paper and waited for someone to notice where the holes didn't match. The detective slid the grocery ball back into its jacket and placed the storage set on top. Let's photograph every sheet, he said. Staples, dents, all of it. Leah nodded. She was learning to listen to the things that could not speak. The blade of a pencil line, the ghost of a stamp, the nervous shape of an email subject typed too fast at 11:08 p.m. Little cuts. Enough of them, and a story bled through. County Library map room, late afternoon. The drawer groaned like an old hinge when the librarian slid it open. Inside lay broad sheets under Mylar, state highway plats, detour plans, and a stack of District 4 construction maps dated 1995 to 1998. The paper smelled faintly of toner and dust. The detective eased one sheet onto the table. Scale 1 equal 1000. A pencil legend in the corner Red River Bridge Rehab, temp traffic plan. He traced the main line with a ruler. Leah leaned in, eyes following his finger, the way you follow a road out of habit. Half an inch past the bridge symbol, a thin ribbon appeared, temp exit C, cutting from the southbound lane to a service road that looped behind a small rectangle labeled way STA. Inactive nights. A hand-drawn note in the margin, older pencil, different hand, said local access, only, spur. He checked the chainage ticks. Mile 214.7 to 215.1. There, he said softly. A temporary ramp. The librarian, who had stayed too long to be just passing through, tilted her head. Locals still call it the spur, she said, like she was giving directions, not history. After the bridge work, they pulled the signs and cold patched the ramp. But you can see it in winter from the farm road. You know what you're looking for. The detective photographed the sheet, corners, title block, Revision stamp. Rev 11th February 1997. He held his phone over the call-out box. Detour nights only. Contractor access via way station yard. Leah found an aerial photo in another folder, black and white. Leaf off season, resolution gritty as sand. The highway ran like a scar. Behind the way station, a pale path curved where grass should have been. A ghost ramp. Ray said spur on the tape, she said. Half to the map, half to herself. They called a retired district foreman, whose name the librarian offered with the care of someone handling a fragile plate. He picked up on a second ring, voice gravel, TV low in the background. Yeah, he said when the detective asked. We cut a temp exit there to stage rigs during the bridge rehab. 2 winters, if memory holds. Pulled the panels in 98, filled the cut. Folks still used the dirt when the station boys left the gate swung. Shouldn't have, but they did. You ever run night audits there? The detective asked. A pause. Contractors' bean counters showed sometimes. We left a lamp on. No troopers after 10. You didn't hear that from me. Mile 215 spur had never lived on a public map. It lived in field books, in foreman's memory, in a pencil note on a sheet that didn't leave the district cabinet. They drove out before dusk. The main line wore summer heat like a film. At the mile where the map put the ramp, the shoulder widened for no good reason, then narrowed. In the grass beyond the guardrail, 2 cut posts lay flush with the dirt, saw marks silver under rust. A patch of old asphalt, sun-checked and gray, arched toward scrub trees like a faint bruise. Leah set her palm on the cold patch seam. You would have seen it in rain, she said. Reflectors would have caught and run. Behind the tree line, the way station sat like a glass box with the lights out. The bar arm was gone, just hinge scars and anchor bolts shining dull. Weeds had braided the lot into rectangles. A small back gate hung at a polite angle, as if still waiting on someone to finish a sentence. Near the spur's ghost mouth, a concrete pad crouched in the brush, 2 steel pipes rising out of it like broken handles. The detective stepped carefully through chicory and milkweed and found the stubs of a green sign on the ground, face down. He didn't flip it. He photographed the backs, the oval washers, the sheared bolts. Temporary means nobody writes the eulogy, he said. Back in town, he and Leah spread the day's finds on a diner table the color of a Band-Aid. The place had been shuttered for years, blinds tilted, a closed sign politely permanent, but the owner let the sheriff's people use the side room now and then. On the detective's laptop, he overlaid the detour plan on a modern map. The lines kissed in the same place where the shoulder fattened for no reason. Leah pulled the pay stub copy and the fuel advance code from her folder and set them beside a thin plastic sleeve she'd found in her father's crate, a credit imprint slip with raised numbers pressed through the paper. Merchant line. Riverbend Fuel, 12th February 1997, 3:57. The phone number was printed in tiny type along the bottom. The detective dialed. Through the thin wall, beyond the service door, a desk phone started ringing in the closed diner, echoing once, twice, then settling to a patient buzz that felt older than voicemail. Leah and the detective stared at each other, then at the door. Same lot, Leah said. Fuel Island on the east side. He let it ring, then hung up and tried the reverse directory. The number still resolved to River Bend Fuel at the Way Station Road, even if the pumps had vanished and the grill was cold. The timestamp on the imprint slip fit the tape within minutes. The slip's imprint showed Ray's company card. On the signature line, his name, a familiar slope, dragged by a pen run out of ink. Receipts don't care about stories, the detective said. They just add minutes. He penciled a lean timeline on a napkin. 357, fuel slip river bend. 412, CB, blue sedan, spur sign. 415, spur behind me. A map line from the fuel lot to the ghost ramp to the river bridge made a short triangle. The road had once told a driver where to turn, and then pretended it never had. The spur lay in pencil on old paper and in the land if you knew how to squint. Somewhere between the fuel island and the cold patch seam, Ray Mercer had made a choice, and a voice had told him to maintain course. The present had paved over it. The past still pointed with two cut posts and a phone that rang in a room with the lights off. The diner off the Beltway smelled like coffee and fryer oil that had lived there longer than the wallpaper. Out back, reefers idled in a slow, steady chorus. The detective slid into a booth across from a man with hands like tie-down hooks and a cap that said Navarro Line Hall in sun-faded thread. "Earl Navarro," he said, offering a grip that tested knuckles but didn't break them. "Pulled doubles back then." "New Ray." Leah set a small recorder on the formica and nodded. Earl looked at the window instead of the mic. "Saw him the week he went missing," he said. "Night run. Weather like wet chalk. He took off ahead of me by an hour." "You two talk on the radio?" the detective asked. Earl's smile ghosted. Ray wasn't a chatterbox. Kept it to lane warnings and mile marks. But that night, I caught a piece. He said he had a blue sedan in his glass, hung there like a magnet. Never tried to pass. Never dropped out of sight. That ain't normal out here. Folks either pass you mad or fade off board. "How long did it stay?" Leah asked. Earl took a sip, thought. "Saw it in Indiana. Still there over the line into Illinois. 2 states by my count, if the weather didn't lie. I caught the tail of his taillights near a rest pull, and that blue was still glued a quarter-mile back. Gave me the creeps, and I don't spook easy." "Handle any calls?" the detective said. "Ray keyed once," Earl answered. "Said, if I don't clear the spur, I'm turning at the river." I keyed up to ask, "What spur?" and he was gone into static. I figured construction mess. They were doing bridge patches all winter. Leah exchanged a look with the detective. The wording matched the tape. Different ears, same night. Earl rubbed a thumb over a crack in the tabletop. "You get a follow car like that, you start to stage moves. Tap the fogs. Nudge the speed a hair. See if it adjusts." He said it adjusted. "That's attention, not coincidence." "You ever see that sedan's plate?" Leah asked. "Rain wrote on the glass," Earl said. "Only thing I saw bright was the shape. Compact, low nose. Could have been a fleet car. Could have been nothing. But it never acted like nothing." They thanked him and stepped back into the damp air. Trucks hissed. A crow walked the curb like it owned the lot. Leah let the wind cool her cheeks, and then followed the detective to the afternoon's second visit. The retired trooper kept his uniforms in plastic, lined like quiet soldiers in a spare room. He set coffee on coasters that read State Fair 89 and lowered himself into a chair that sighed as if it knew him. "Name's Arlen Tate," he said. "Pulled nights on that corridor. I can tell you this much. The way station out by the river wasn't always dead after 10. Officially, lights off. Unofficially," he lifted a finger, "there were nights you'd see a desk lamp burning in there and the bar arm down. We called it library hours." "For what?" the detective asked. "Private audit is what the brass called it, if you asked twice," Tate said, not smiling. "Contractors with clipboards. Not troopers. They'd wave certain rigs through the back when construction detours got hairy. Said it kept lanes clear. We were told to stage elsewhere." "No log entries?" Leah asked. Tate shook his head. "We kept a pad in the cruiser. If the sergeant said relocate, we relocated. That was the entry. You won't find a memo that says, 'Turn the light on for strangers.' You'll find the absence of us instead. He leaned back, eyes on a memory only he could see. There was a winter where a temporary ramp, we called it a spur, fed behind the station yard. Not on the big map, on the field sheets, handy for night crews. Harder on drivers who didn't expect a choice. Night you remember? The detective said. Tate nodded once. Heavy rain. I sat on mile 212 and watched a cab roll past with a blue car tucked in the spray. Stayed a football field back, like it knew how to look harmless. I keyed my unit to slide up, and the sergeant chirped, "Relocate." So I did. By the time I looped, both were gone. Took the long way around to the bridge. The station lot showed a glow through the blinds, and the bar arm was down. That's all I'm gonna swear to. Leah's hand found the edge of her notebook. Would anyone else put that in writing? People don't write things they'd rather explain, Tate said. But talk to the foreman who ran the detours. He'll remember where he left the cones. He tapped his temple. And talk to whoever signed RF on your papers. That ain't a trooper's mark. They walked out into a yard that smelled of cut grass and rain. A dog watched them from a porch and didn't bother to bark. The detective wrote library hours, relocate, and absence as record on his pad. Back in the car, Leah watched the highway through the windshield while wipers made neat arcs. 2 states, she said. A blue sedan that acted like attention. A light in a station that was closed. And a ramp the map forgot. The detective answered. Memories didn't file themselves. They lived in scars and diner talk, in a trooper's finger pointing toward a lamp no one logged, in a driver's description of a tale that matched a night on tape. The official record stayed clean. The human one kept ink where the paper didn't. County Forensics Bay, morning. They parked the cab beneath a bank of soft lamps, blue tape boxing off a clean perimeter. A toolmark examiner in a canvas apron leaned into the dash with a gooseneck light and a jeweler's loop. He didn't rush. He breathed, adjusted focus, and spoke like a man reading ridges on a coin. Factory dash tags use rosette rivets, he said. 6 pedal star impressions. These are domed pops, hardware aisle. He traced a gloved fingertip around the plate's edge. See the paint halo? They pulled the tag after the dash was sprayed, then set it back. You can still feel the chatter where a bit walked. He tilted the loop. Adhesive smear under the lower right corner. Not OEM. He eased a mirror wand down the defroster gap. Primary VIN reads clean. Let's find his secondary stamp. They jacked the front, set stands, and slid under. The examiner chalked the right frame rail and rubbed with a soft block until numbers rose like frost. He photographed, then measured the stroke depth. Frame stamp matches the series, he said. No evidence of grind down. The plate's been off, not the steel. Leah exhaled, but didn't smile. So the cab is the right cab, she said. And someone still took the tag off and put it back. The examiner nodded. Tag work happens for all the wrong reasons and a few legal ones. These aren't legal ones. He bagged both rivet heads after he teased them loose, each in its own envelope. Under magnification, you could see the faint oval crush marks from a cheap hand tool, not the crisp flares of a factory press. The detective wrote re-riveted in his notebook and underlined it twice. They moved to paper. Department of Insurance. Records Unit. The claim file didn't live in a drawer. It lived on microfiche. A clerk slid a carrier across the glass, clicked to a frame, and the screen bloomed with a ledger that had been typed the year people still faxed cover sheets that said from claim hash 97 to 214 TRK. Insured, Mercer and Sunline Hall, LLC, leased asset. Loss type, theft, non-recovery. Date of loss, 12th February 1997. Payment, 1st April 1997, 6 weeks, post-vanish. Salvage, none. Police report. Attached, missing person, not a stolen vehicle report. Exception code. EX 413 expedited. Approvals. Reg. MGR. Risk consultant RF. The detective and Leah stared at the frozen numbers the way you stare at a horizon you didn't expect. One line down, another field glowed in the matrix. Lien holder payoff. Issued. Remainder to insured. Issued. Subrogation. Closed. No recovery. They paid a total loss without a recovered unit, the detective said, with a missing person report standing in for a theft report. And they closed Subro without a salvage path. The clerk printed the ledger. The header strip along the top carried a timestamp 1st April 1997 9:18 and a workstation tag from a claims office 2 counties over. The detective boxed EX 413 in pencil and wrote Y beside it. The fiche flipped to a memo chain. Audit notes, Q3 1997. Item 12. Early close on non-recovery tractor claim. Missing police theft report. Exception documented under EX 413. Approved by Reg. MGR and subcontracted risk consultant. Recommendation. Tighten exception criteria. Avoid using missing person reports to justify non-recovery when asset location unknown. Another frame. Vendor invoices for professional services. A line item. R. Fielder and Associates, Risk Consulting. Project. Loss mitigation review after hours. Bill date. 31st March 1997. Hours. 5.0. Note. Reviewed route compliance. Verified logs. Recommend expedite. Leah tapped the screen where R. Fielder lived in tiny type. RF, she said quietly. The initials dented into the storage ball. The late-night emails. The calm voice on the tape that never used a handle. The detective didn't nod. He wrote R. Fielder, subcontract, and drew a thin line back to RF on an earlier page. They pulled the exception policy on paper from the same reel. It was short, unfussy, 2 paragraphs of corporate language that boiled down to this. Non-recovery claims could expedite after 30 days if vehicle theft was documented and salvage prospects were nil. It did not mention missing drivers. It did not mention substituted reports. 6 weeks is inside normal if requirements are met, the clerk offered, not volunteering an opinion. But this, she tapped the memo about the missing person report, is not the usual stack. They asked for the payments register. A machine whined, printed a pale strip of figures, and curled it like a receipt. Amounts redacted by policy, but dates and payees visible. 2 checks, one to a bank holding the tractor's note, one to the insured entity. Both cut the same day the risk consultant billed after hours. Back in the forensics bay, the examiner laid the rivet heads under a microscope camera and pushed the image to a small monitor. The dome showed asymmetrical collapse, a squeeze from cheap jaws, and tiny skid scars where the setter slipped. He flipped to a cross-section of a factory rosette rivet from a reference kit, star petals, crisp lands. Not the same tools, he said. Not the same day. The detective clicked his pen closed, as if that sound might add a period the page didn't have. Tag comes off, he said. Tag goes back. Insurance pays without a recovered unit. The ledger says risk consultant signs off. The night ops emails mention temp route correction and night audit coordination. And the ball that points to storage gets a pair of initials that match a consultant's name. Leah watched the cab under the lights. Steel dulled by years of water, dash scarred by hands that had meant to do something neat and left it a little crooked. Tidy books, she said, voice even. Crooked tag. Tidy books, the detective agreed. He boxed EX 413 one more time, then wrote 2 words under it. Pattern watch. He wasn't accusing. He was lining up holes in paper, rivets in steel, and a date that sat too comfortably next to a bill for 5 hours of after-hours certainty. Outside, a summer wind pressed against the bay door and then let go, like a breath someone had been holding since 1997. Leah found the number on a yellowed card in her father's old Rolodex. The ink had bled at the edges. A name sat above the digits in a neat block hand: Ferris Knights. Someone had added an extension, then crossed it out, then written a second line: home. She set the card on the kitchen table and dialed. The line rang with that old copper sound, steady and patient, like a hallway light turning on in rooms you can't see. The detective leaned on the counter, legal pad ready. On the fifth ring, a click. Air. Then a man, voice papery and close to the receiver. "Hello, Mr. Ferris?" Leah asked. "My name is Leah Mercer, Ray Mercer's daughter." Silence settled, not dead air, breath, small and shallow, like someone measuring distance with their lungs. "I remember Ray," he said at last. "Good hands." Didn't waste words, a cough, soft. "How did you get this number?" "From his files," Leah said. "We recovered his cab. There was a recorder in it." She kept her tone even. "We also found two versions of a bill of lading. One to a grocery DC, one to Redline Storage B12. A hiss of intake. "Who else is with you?" "The detective handling the case," she said. "We're not recording you." They weren't. The little red light on the counter stayed dark. Ferris let the quiet ride a moment. Somewhere on his end, a television murmured vowels. The sound turned down to a glow. He spoke like a man who had practiced not naming things for a long time. "I'm retired," he said. Then retired. Another breath. "That night, some of us were told to clean." "Clean what?" the detective asked, gentle. "Logs," Ferris said. "Reprint. Remove deviations. Make it look like normal route." That was the phrase. His words came out clipped, like he was stacking index cards. "We got told don't make waves." He deviated. "Who told you?" Leah said. "A voice over the office radio," Ferris answered. "Not CB. Not the dispatcher room. It came through the intercom in the operations office after 10. Calm voice. Knew our names. Used first names, not handles." He paused. "We had a risk consultant on after hours. R. Fielder." He had that tone. Leah stared at the card. The initials had been pressed into other paper like a bruise. "RF," she said softly. "He wasn't dispatch," Ferris went on. "He sat with the regional sometimes. Kept a binder with exception codes. EX 413 showed up a lot that spring." Ferris cleared his throat and lowered his voice. "Your dispatcher, Connie, she wrote the ticks on the sevens. She left them on the paper. She didn't sign the approval. She couldn't." "Why not?" the detective asked. "Because that stamp came from upstairs," Ferris said. "We just pushed paper to match it." Leah held the receiver closer. "Why reprint the logs at all?" "To make route compliance match the claim," Ferris said, as if reciting a line he wished he had never memorized. "If the claim says theft, non-recovery, you don't want a storage bay and a temp spur living on the same page." He let out a small sound that might have been a laugh once, pared down by years. "You learn to make neat stories. Neat stories clear desks." He went quiet. She could hear the thin work of his breathing. The detective didn't fill the space. After a long minute, Ferris spoke again, lower, as if leaning nearer to the mouthpiece. "Listen," he said. "If you still have the cab, check the spare fuse panel, passenger side, behind the kick cover. There's a gap by the relay bar. Some drivers tuck things there. Spares. Notes. I've seen." He stopped and corrected himself. "I heard someone say they saw Ray put a little tape in once when the lot got busy." Leah's throat tightened. You're sure? I can't be sure of anything from 1997, he said, soft. I can be sure of where I'd look if I didn't trust my own desk the next day. He inhaled. We all heard the maintained coarse voice now and then. It wasn't the road. It was the room. Mr. Ferris, the detective said, would you put any of this in a statement? A long, gentle exhale. I'm an old man, Ferris said. I don't have statements. I have regrets. They told us he deviated. We made the paper say he didn't. That's all I'm going to be able to carry. The TV on his end grew a notch, then dipped. I never called you, he added, almost a whisper. You never called me. The number you dialed is going to be different tomorrow. A beat. I'm sorry for your father. The line clicked. The old copper hum returned, and then fell quiet when Leah set the receiver down. They didn't speak for a moment. The kitchen clock's second hand ticked like a small metronome. Outside, a truck downshifted at the light and rolled on. Leah picked up the Rolodex card again. Ferris Nights. Her thumb smudged the edge where someone else's thumb had lived a lifetime ago. She looked at the detective. The panel, she said. He was already reaching for his keys. Forensics is still open, he said. Let's ask them for a screwdriver and good light. They left the card on the table, the name facing up, as if the room needed to watch it while they were gone. The house breathed like houses do when doors close and tires find the road. In the quiet that followed, the past rearranged itself by one step, a voice by a radio, a phrase pressed into a policy, a place to hide a small tape where paper couldn't reach. Forensics Bay, after hours. The cab sat under soft lamps again, water stains dried to pale maps across the dash. A tech eased his hand along the passenger kick cover, feeling for the hidden tab that old drivers knew and manuals didn't mention. Plastic flexed. A dull snap. The panel came away like a lid. Behind it lived the spare fuse block, a neat grid of colored blades, relay cubes lined like bricks. Down along the relay bar, where metal met a shadow, there was the thin dark of a gap. The tech swept a pen light and saw a strip of electrical tape that wasn't factory, matte, bubbled at the edges, stuck to dust that shouldn't have been inside the cab of a truck that never came home. He slid a plastic pry under the edge, lifted slow. The tape peeled in a curl. Out came a bundle the size of a matchbox, wrapped twice, then once more for luck. He placed it on a clean mat and worked the tape free until the last turn let go. A micro cassette leaned against the light. No label, just the faint ghost of old adhesive, where a sticker might have been a lifetime ago. No one spoke. The tech nodded toward the warm cabinet he'd already turned on. Same slow dry, he said. Then we see if the years were kind. They waited. The hum of the cabinet, the quiet scuff of a pen on a pad, Leah's hand around a coffee that had gone cool. Time found small ways to measure itself. When the tech lifted the cassette out with tweezers and set it in the service recorder, he did it like putting a ring back in a finger-shaped box. Play. At first, cab noise, a soft, steady road hiss. Then Ray's voice, closer to the mic than on the first tape, like he'd leaned in to make sure it got him right. Consignee instructions, he read, calm and practical, the way you read to yourself when you don't trust someone else to keep the page. Red line storage, Bay B12. After hours access okay. Paper rustled. Back gate railway yard. Do not hold at main arm. Door code. He spoke the digits slow, 4093. Audit crew arrives separate from driver. Call number posted on glass, not dispatch. If gate is shut, wait at rear lot. Do not block spur. Leah lifted her eyes. The words matched the pencil note, the facts, the detour plan, line for line. The same new world the company's normal route had never admitted existed. A click. The thrum of the lane again. A thermos cap set down. Then his tone shifted a half shade, thinner, like he'd moved one eye back to the mirror and kept his mouth at the mic. Blue sedan again, he said. Came off the ramp with me. Still hugging my bumper. The tape carried the sound of rain finding the cab roof and riding there. He breathed once, steady. If I don't clear the spur, I'm turning back at the river. Silence did not arrive right away. It developed like a print, rode under everything. The faint tick of a dash vent, a sleeve brushing nylon. Then nothing but long static. Not the sharp chatter of a key up, but a wide, soft wash. As if the recorder still heard the highway, and the highway had run out of words. The counter moved. The meters held a gray hum. No crash. No shout. No coda. Just the invisible thing that sometimes follows a sentence and stays too long. The tech let it roll to leader, then stopped. He saved the capture to 3 drives, labeled each with time and case, set the cassette back in its shell, and closed the lid with the care people reserved for items that prove they've been right to keep faith. Leah sat very still. The detective slid the fax from red line beside his notes, drew a line from audit crew arrived separate from driver to do not hold at main arm, then to the way station on the map overlay, then to the spur he'd traced with a pencil. Ray put the instructions on tape, Leah said, voice even. Not the log. The tape, because logs can be cleaned, the detective answered. Tapes. Hide behind relays. He wrote second tape, consignee match, and blue sedan again, and turned back in a blocky column. The phrase do not block spur got its own box. You could live a whole winter inside a box like that. In the silence that followed, the room hummed with small, ordinary electricity, the same kind the lab had heard under the first recording, the kind that lives in panels and ballasts, the kind a person might mistake for the air if they'd never listened for it on a screen. 2 voices now, Leah said. His, and the one he trusted enough to read against. And the voice that told him to maintain course. The detective nodded once, and a path that wanted records to say it didn't exist. He turned the micro-cassette case in his hand, thumb finding the scuffed edge where tape once held a label. He left this where office stories couldn't reach without a screwdriver, he said. Maybe for Monday him. Maybe for anyone who knew where to look. They rebagged the cassette. The tech reseated the kick cover until it clicked, as if the cab wanted to go back to the shape it remembered. Outside, night pressed against the bay door. Somewhere between a fuel lot and a cold patch seam, a man had promised himself a turn if a sign didn't make sense. On paper, that turn had been erased. On tape, it lived where you could hear it. And sometimes hearing is the only proof a road leaves. They started with the initials and worked outward. On Leah's table, 3 scans sat side by side, the storage ball with a hard-pressed RF in the approval block, the insurance ledger listing approvals by Risk Consultant RF, and the vendor invoice from R. Fielder and Associates, Risk Consulting, billed the night before the claim was paid. The letters weren't identical. No 2 impressions ever are. But the habit was. A firm bar on the R, a quick hook on the F. Both dropped a hair lower than the line, as if the writer liked gravity. The detective called up the Secretary of State site and found a thin public record. R. Fielder and Associates, LLC, formed in 1994, single member, mailing address a P.O. box in the next county, purpose line, consulting, risk/compliance. The annual reports were punctual and spare. No employees listed. No website. The kind of firm that moves by phone and paper and leaves very little of itself behind. He pulled insurance bulletins and regulatory audits off a second screen, the sort of PDF detritus that only learns how to be meaningful when you stack it. In a Q3 compliance review from another carrier, a phrase recurred: expedited non-recovery on long-haul tractors. A footnote named outside review by risk contractor. The initials in the margin weren't RF, but the structure rang the same. Exception code cited, logs verified, salvage prospects nil. With the records clerk's help, they requested 3 closed claim files from different companies in the region, public to the degree that redaction pens could make them so. Weeks compressed into a pile of microfiche prints and fax covers. Patterns leaked through the black bars anyway. Bill of lading pairs, one to a legitimate consignee, one to a storage bay or third-party unit, with staple holes that didn't line up. Night emails with neutral subject lines, temp route correction, night audit coordination, time stamped between 22:30 and 23:15. Exception codes invoked within 30 to 45 days. Payments issued same day and after hours invoice landed from an outside risk consultant. None of the outside consultants were named R. Fielder in those other files. But in Ray's, they were. The detective didn't circle the name, he boxed the behavior. They found a retired internal auditor who would talk if nobody used her last name. She kept her old binder on a lower shelf like a doorstop and opened it as if it might bite. We looked for mismatched tells, she said, tapping a page. Missing ink in a rubber stamp, pressure dents from a form that shouldn't have been nearby, log headers reprinted with a newer ribbon. Plenty of claims are honest mess, storms, theft, bad luck. But when you see altered bills and tidy timelines with no salvage, someone's smoothing the story. Our notes called it narrative repair. Nobody wrote that in an email. The consultants? The detective asked. Independent, she said. Hired per case. Sometimes they blessed exceptions after hours, said logs were fine, routes clean. We later learned the logs were reprints. She closed the binder and rested both hands on it. No single sheet will say the word you're tempted to say. Paper doesn't confess. It aligns. Back at the board, the detective pinned threads by function, not blame. Temp route correction night audit storage bay B12 non-recovery claim EX 413 outside approval. He wrote who benefits in the corner and didn't underline it. Leah slid a 4th sheet under the clips. A company phone list Connie had mailed her once in a Christmas card, long after she left dispatch. Regional Manager, line 211. Risk Consultant, R. Fielder, line 219. The names were typed. The RF here was just letters. It still landed. You're not saying crime, Leah said. I'm saying pattern, the detective answered. Drivers vanish for 100 reasons. Books don't have to vanish with them. Here, they learned how to tidy themselves. He thumbed back through the claims register. 2 checks cut 1st April 1997. The risk invoice stamped the same morning, after hours line item the night before. It would read clean to anyone skimming for totals. It only looked odd when set against a cab with a re-riveted VIN tag, 2 balls that disagreed, and a tape that remembered an exit the maps forgot. They sent a courteous letter to the P.O. box listed for R. Fielder and Associates. It came back moved/unknown. They tried a second address from an old vendor W9. The return receipt arrived stamped signed, but without a name they could read. Nothing explicit, the detective said, folding the receipt into the file. Only the same shape drawn 3 different ways. He logged the signature traits the way the toolmark examiner had logged rivets, bar length on R, baseline drop on F, pressure dent below the cross. Not proof, not alone. But when pressed against timelines, emails, and exception codes, the sheet stack made a sound. Not loud. Persistent. Leah looked at the board, arrows, dates, words boxed in pencil. If paper doesn't confess, she said, what does? Sometimes water, the detective said. Sometimes tape. Sometimes the person who finally gets tired of narrative repair. He didn't say a name. He didn't have one he could say. He had a route marked by habits. a consultant who arrived at night, a ledger that closed fast, and books that bent just enough to spare themselves the trouble of telling the messier truth. Spur Pond. Dawn. Mist sat low over the backwater like a lid. The ghost ramp ended in reeds and a brown oval that locals called a pond and maps didn't name. The sheriff kept the scene small: one truck, one boat, yellow tape looped between two cut posts. No crowd, just the quiet of a place built to be forgotten. The volunteer team worked the way they always did: method, not drama. They strung a grid line from a willow to a fence stake and dropped lead markers every 5 yards. A diver checked a pulse induction detector, another clipped a silt fan to his harness. The plan was slow lanes, fingertip distance from the bottom, no blind grabs. The detective stood with Leah at the berm, boots and wet grass, eyes on the flat water. The first pass raised chocolate clouds that drifted and settled like breath. Bottles, old bolts, a tire bead. The detector chirped now and then: false loves, fishing lures, a hinge, a spark plug. The sheriff logged each pull by time, lane, and hand, no guesses on the line. On the third lane, the lead diver's glove paused at the root of a cattail. His light found a thin rectangle half buried at an angle, numbers winking through mud. He slid a blade under it, freed it with patience, and lifted a metal strip into the beam. Not big, not heavy, but stamped with a row of characters, deep and straight, the kind you don't hand punch in a hurry. He bagged it underwater, called it up with a tug on the line. At the bank, the detective rinsed the face with bottled water until the silt let go. The strip's edges carried two sheared rivet stubs, flat on one side, torn bright on the other, fresh once, now dull with time. Across the top, a crease where a dash lip had once shaded it. He didn't need a book to name it. Windshield VIN tag, he said, from the dash line. The toolmark examiner from the bay would say more later about factory fonts and stroke depth, but Leah had already lined it in her head. Frame stamp on the cab reading true. Dash plate re-riveted. Now a separate windshield tag found where it shouldn't be. If a hand had wanted numbers to disappear, a lake was a neat idea. The lake had said no. They drifted the lanes again. The detector sang low at the edge of the wayyard fence, near a scoured pocket where water curled on windy days. The diver's light found plastic, not metal, a small oval fob with a faded company logo, clipped to a key ring that had rusted itself closed. He held it up, and for a second the pond looked like a showroom, the thing bright against brown. On shore, the detective dried it with gauze. A tiny laser-etched serial lived on the back, along with gate access and a phone number that still resolved to a dead switchboard. He bagged it, logged it, and texted a photo to a number Connie still answered some nights. Her reply came 5 minutes later, letters blunt, not Ray's. She sent a 1996 access list she'd kept out of pure habit, columns with fob IDs and names written in her ticks and tails. Ray Mercer, fob 1187. The pond fob read 1203. On the list, 1203 sat beside Ops after hours. Leah touched the bag with the back of one knuckle, not quite a reach. He carried a leather tab, she said softly. Not plastic. He hated fobs. She looked at the detective. That one belonged to someone else. They worked the grid to the edge and back. No bones. No belts. No cloth that said more than trash. The team called clear on the last lane. The sheriff wrote the word anyway. No remains observed. It mattered how you said it. It mattered that you said it at all. On a folding table, the fines sat under clear lids. The VIN strip with its honest numbers, the fob that didn't belong to Ray, a little fan of screws and hooks that meant nothing to anyone but the pond. The detective photographed the serials and the lane flags, then set the VIN strip beside a printout of the frame stamp from the forensics bay. The characters matched digit for digit. Plate reset on the reservoir cab, he said, thinking aloud. Windshield tag tossed here. Frame stamp true. Someone took numbers off in pieces and didn't take all of them far. Leah watched a dragonfly balance on the grid line like a blue paperclip. They untied the story and threw the knots in different water, she said. The sheriff sealed the bags, the divers coiled their lines, and let the pond smooth itself back to forgetfulness. Wind ran a hand across the cattails, and the mist thinned to nothing that a camera would notice. No headline pictures. No answers in capital letters. Just objects that had once been part of a truck and part of a company and part of a night, now laid out in the sun with numbers that still told the truth if you knew how to read them. Water does not file reports. It returns what paper tries to edit. They left the spur as they found it, unmarked, out of season reel. Behind them, the pond took back its color. In a bag on the seat, a key fob waited to be compared to a ledger where it did not match a driver's name. In another, a line of stamped steel held the same story as a chalked rail. The cab was itself, even if someone had tried to teach the dashboard to say otherwise. The diner had the same laminated menus as every other diner on that stretch of road: eggs 3 ways, coffee forever. The former regional manager chose a back booth that faced the parking lot, not the door. He set his briefcase beside him like a pet that might bolt. Leah arrived with a single folder. She didn't stack papers on the table. She kept them zipped and waited while he stirred sugar into coffee he wouldn't drink. He was older than the photo she'd found in a trade newsletter. Softer at the jaw. A pale groove where a ring had once lived. He looked at her the way men look at storms they can't outdrive. "You wanted 15 minutes," she said. He nodded. 15. The detective sat 2 booths away, facing the kitchen pass, a newspaper open to sports like a costume. The manager saw him and didn't comment. He wrapped both hands around his cup as if cups were rules. Leah slid a single photocopy across the salt and pepper. No accusation, just a page. Bill of lading, redline storage, Bay B12. Approval block with RF pressed into the paper hard enough to leave a dent. "We were told this didn't exist," she said. "We were sent a grocery DC copy in 1997. Framed it. But this one sat in a county box for 27 years. He didn't touch the paper. His eyes flicked to the initials like a man who knows what letters can do. "We had consultants," he said finally. "Risk compliance. After hours when it got busy." His voice was flat, the words laid down like boards. "R. Fielder," Leah said. "Night emails. Exception codes. EX 413. He stirred the coffee again, slow circles. "I'm not the man who signs those checks anymore," he said. "If I ever was." She let silence do the next 30 seconds. Trucks hissed on the highway. A waitress stacked clean mugs. Somewhere, a dishwasher thumped shut. He watched the door as if the truth might walk in and sit down. "We recovered a windshield VIN tag from the spur pond," Leah said, still calm. "We found a company gate fob not assigned to my father. We have 2 tapes, his voice reading storage instructions, and a second voice saying maintain course. We have 2 balls for the same night, one on your letterhead." He swallowed nothing. "You're good at collecting." "I learned from people who kept neat books," she said. A corner of his mouth moved, not a smile. The spoon tapped once on the rim. He placed it on a napkin like he'd been trained to keep tables clean. "We had a culture," he said, eyes still on the parking lot. "Keep freight moving. Keep claims from dragging. Don't let a messy week become a messy quarter." He slid a sugar packet into a straight line with the others. "There are codes for that. There are vendors for that. You don't need me to tell you their names." "Names help," Leah said. "Names change," he answered. She didn't push the fob bag across the table. She didn't say the words that would end the meeting. She asked the question she had rehearsed on long drives, the one that cataloged and forgave nothing. "Did you ever tell my father to take a route he wasn't supposed to take?" He kept his hands on the cup. "We didn't tell drivers much," he said. "We told paper what it needed to say. Drivers read paper." "Who told the room to tell the paper?" she asked. He blinked, slow like a man waking from a nap he hadn't planned. "After hours," he said. "The phone would ring in ops. A voice you didn't argue with would say the word expedite. That word gets into the carpet. You can't vacuum it out." He finally looked at her. The mask didn't drop, but something behind it moved. We were told to move freight, not stories, he said. Nothing in it would fit in an affidavit. It fit in a life. Leah let the sentence sit on the formica between the salt and the copy of the ball. She didn't write it down. She didn't need to. It joined other things that wouldn't make a headline and would still be true after the newspapers lined drawers. Did you ever hear the phrase mile 215 spur? She asked. He exhaled through his nose. Temporary, he said. Construction. The kind of thing you don't map, because then you have to explain it. We used it until we didn't. He nudged the sugar packet until it squared to the edge of the menu. You won't find a memo that says that. I found a map, she said, and a fuel slip that rang a phone in a closed diner. Phones ring longer than jobs last, he said, almost kindly. He slid out of the booth, placed 2 bills under the cup, and left without touching the briefcase for an extra second, as if letting it stay would be a kind of confession. Then he picked it up and went. The waitress poured coffee Leah didn't want. The detective folded his newspaper, left money for a pie he didn't eat, and joined her. Nothing we can charge, he said. Something I can remember, she answered. Outside, the lot shone with a thin film of drizzle. Freight moved on the highway, straight lines on a gray day. Stories moved slower. They took the long way through rooms where the word expedite still hummed in the carpet, and nobody wrote down who had said it first. The pieces didn't shout. They lined up. A driver's voice on 2 microcassettes. Read what paper later forgot. Red line storage. Baby 12. Back gate through the way yard. Do not block spur. Audit crew arrives separate from driver. He named a mile marker. The maps no longer showed. He marked his own plan. If I don't clear the spur, I'm turning back at the river. He noted a blue sedan that stayed in his mirror too long to be weather. A second voice, thin and office clean, told him maintain course. No handle. No 10 codes. Not CB flavor. The lab heard the small room behind it. Steady hum, soft clicks, the sound of panels, not highway. On paper, 2 bills of lading lived for the same night. One to a grocery DC, the copy the family framed. One to storage B12, the copy that slept in a county box. The pencil note on that storage said held Connie's ticks on her 7s, the way she always wrote when she wanted drivers to read in rain. But the approval block carried. RF pressed hard enough to dent stock. In the insurance file, a risk consultant with the same initials billed after hours and signed an exception that let a non-recovery pay out without a recovered unit. The ledger closed fast. The books were neat. At the reservoir, the cab's dash plate had been re-riveted with hardware that didn't come from the factory. Under the windshield, a VIN strip turned up alone in a pond by the spur. Numbers honest, rivet stubs torn bright once, now dull with time. On the fence line, divers found a company gate fob that didn't match Ray's ID. Connie's old list placed that serial in ops after hours. At the county annex, night emails wore quiet words. Temp route correction, night audit coordination. Time stamps landed between 22:30 and 23:15. Subject lines tried to be forgettable. They weren't, once you read them beside 2 balls with staple holes that didn't align. A former line haul driver remembered the blue sedan across 2 states. A retired trooper remembered a lamp at an unlit way station and a bar arm down during private audit. He remembered being told to relocate. You could not print that. You could hear it. The map room filled the gap between tape and road. Old detour plans drew the temporary exit in pencil, the small arc from southbound lane to the yard behind the station. In the margin, someone had written what locals still say, spur. The sign came down in 1998. The cold patch stayed. So did the shoulder that widened for no reason. In a quiet kitchen, Ferris, tired and careful, said the word people use when they want paper to stop making trouble. Cleaned. Reprint logs. Remove deviations. Make the route look normal. Don't make waves. He deviated. He didn't name orders. He named a room where a voice arrived after 10, and everyone learned the shape of it. He told them where to look for the second tape. It was there. None of it accused. It implied a pattern, not a charge, a quiet reroute during construction detours, a follow card that acted like attention, a backgate instruction that never reached the family copy, approval letters with the same initials that surfaced on the claim, books that closed tidy while numbers came off a dashboard in pieces. Between the fuel slip at 3:57 and the river bridge after 4, Ray Mercer drove into a space where official lanes and temporary lanes overlapped. The tape says he meant to turn back if the spur didn't clear. The office voice said maintain course. The paper story later said grocery as usual. The water story said tag work and a fob that belonged to someone else. What the tape meant was simple and heavy. Ray tried to document the version the room might erase. He hid it where desks couldn't reach without a screwdriver. Years later, drought and patience made that choice audible. No graphic scenes, no tidy villains, only directions read aloud, a mile marker that didn't exist, and a habit of narrative repair that kept freight moving while stories waited. The case did not end here. It changed shape. The driver's last words were not, "Goodbye." They were instructions and a condition: turn back if the spur doesn't make sense. The road he trusted did not keep the promise. The tape did. They met at first light, when the lake was a mirror and the wind hadn't learned its job yet. The waterline sat lower than any summer Leah could remember, a pale ring on the rocks marking where years had gone. Yellow tape was gone now. The boat ramp was quiet. A card table held coffee, a box of paper cups, and a single object wrapped in a hand towel, her father's CB mic. The divers came in work clothes, not suits. They stood along the berm with the same unshowy patience they'd brought to the water. The sheriff kept his voice low. The detective left his notebook in the car. Earl Navarro, the line haul driver with hands like tie-down hooks, found a place near the willow and didn't speak. The retired trooper, Tate, touched the brim of a cap he no longer wore and let it fall to his side. Connie sent a note instead of herself. Some sevens need their tick. Tell him I kept it neat. Leah set a flat stone on the table, the size of a dinner plate, cleaned and dried the night before. A tiny brass tag she'd had engraved lay beside it. She peeled the backing and pressed the tag to the stone's face, smoothing it with her thumb until it stuck. His call sign, the one he used on good nights, lived there now, small and spare, letters catching the early sun. She unwrapped the mic. The cord had stiffened with time. The push-to-talk bar was polished at the center, where a thumb had learned its path. She cradled it once, took a breath that didn't quite finish, and set it on the stone the way you returned something to the place it always meant to be. No speeches. The sheriff said only the date and the name. We recovered a cab from this reservoir, he added. We did our work. Today belongs to the family. Leah looked at the water. Somewhere under that flat skin, lift bags had bloomed and silt had folded, and a line of stamped numbers had agreed with itself, even when paper didn't. She touched the mic with 2 fingers and then stepped back, leaving the space ahead of the stone for anyone who needed it. A diver placed a small wreath of lake grass beside the mic and didn't claim it. Navarro set a fuel receipt copy under a small stone so the wind wouldn't take it. Trooper Tate stood with his palms pressed to each other, a posture that didn't belong to any manual, and closed his eyes. The detective remained still, looking not at the stone, but at the shape of the shoreline, like he was memorizing a line he didn't plan to write down. Leah spoke when the quiet told her it would hold what she said. He kept his own record, she said. He read instructions into a little machine when paper got loud. He marked a mile that maps forgot. She gave the lake its next sentence. Thank you for listening now. They let the silence do more than any paragraph. A gull crossed the cove once and didn't call. The water clicked against the ramp. Somewhere beyond the trees, a truck took a downshift, a low note that drew a thin smile from Navarro, and then was gone. When it felt right, the detective widened the frame without raising his tone. He spoke of drivers who don't make dawn, of altered routes and temporary lanes that exist for a season and then live only in foreman's pencils. He mentioned books that close too neatly, families who don't get callbacks, and the long work of people who show up with tanks and lines and patience when the water finally lets go. No blame, no verdict, just the fact of absence and the stubbornness of those who keep asking it to explain itself. They carried the stone to the end of the dock. Leah set it where the boards met the lake skin, neither land nor water owning it completely. The mic faced the cove. For a moment the brass letters brightened, and then calmed with the light. On the walk back, Leah fell in beside the detective. "We didn't get everything," she said. "We rarely do," he answered, not unkind. "We got enough to tell the part that was always true." She glanced over her shoulder once more. The wreath shifted, a green ring on a brown surface. The mic sat steady on its stone. Names don't float, she thought. But stories do, and sometimes they come back on low water. They left the shore as they had found it, clean, unfilmed, real. Freight moved somewhere out of sight. The lake kept its slow ledger. And on a small tag, in plain letters, a call sign kept a place for a voice that had read instructions into the dark so that someone, someday, would hear them. If you drove nights in the mid-90s, or you worked a scale house, a road crew, or dispatch, you might remember things the maps forgot. Decommissioned exits, back gate lanes behind way stations, a ramp locals called the Spur. If mile 215 Spur sounds like something you saw, or if your area had its own version, tell us what you remember in the comments. State, highway number, nearest mile marker, rough years, and what you noticed after hours lights, night audit signs, back gate access, unusual detours. Your notes help us build a public list of forgotten spurs and late night practices, one comment at a time. If you ran line haul in 97 and passed a way station that looked closed, but wasn't, or if you handled paperwork with phrases like temp route correction or night audit coordination, share what you can, no names needed. If you have old Polaroids, fuel slips, or route cards that show a temporary exit, you can describe them or check the description for our contact. Please keep it respectful and non-identifying. We'll pin a top comment with any verified updates and add a simple community map of reported spurs and after-hours sites, so future viewers can see what the paper record missed. If you value quiet, careful investigations, no shocks, no graphic detail, consider subscribing and turning on the bell. It helps these long, patient stories reach the people who can add missing pieces. Thank you for watching, for remembering, and for helping families and drivers whose routes were neat on paper, but different on the ground.